Hey everyone, welcome back for another deep dive.
Yeah.
We're all about getting to the good stuff quickly.
That's right. No time wasted.
So today, we're tackling something I think a lot of people struggle with, and that's really being able to talk about their culture in a way that's both meaningful and engaging.
Yeah. Beyond just listing facts and figures.
Exactly. It's more about capturing the essence.
The essence, yeah, like the soul of where you come from.
And the source material we've got for this deep dive is really interesting. It kind of pushes us to move beyond those textbook definitions and really think about how to share our backgrounds in a way that truly connects.
It is about connecting, right? Like, how do you help someone else understand what makes your culture special?
And honestly, for some people, this is more than just like a casual conversation. This could be something they're actually assessed on.
Oh, absolutely. Like, think about those speaking exams or even job interviews where you might be asked about your background.
Yeah, they want to see not just what you say, but how you say it.
Exactly. So fluency, vocabulary, grammar, and how well it all comes together, coherence.
All that good stuff.
It all matters, right? And it all ties back to this idea of effectively communicating your culture.
So the source material actually contrasts this idea of just saying something basic, like we celebrate holidays,
Yeah.
versus really painting a picture.
Give me an example.
Okay, so instead of we have festivals, you could say something like, during Diwali, our homes are aglow with the light of countless lamps, and the night sky erupts with fireworks.
Ah, that's so much more vivid.
Right, it pulls you in.
And it really gets at the key elements of culture, the traditions, the heritage, the social norms.
So let's define those a bit more, because they're kind of like the foundation.
Sure. So traditions, those are like the customs and beliefs,
Mm-hmm.
passed down through generations.
Okay, like family recipes or certain rituals.
Exactly. Then you've got heritage. That's more about the legacy, the history that shaped your culture.
The stories, the monuments, the things that tell the story of where you come from.
And then there are the social norms, the kind of unwritten rules that guide how people interact.
Okay, so those are the ingredients. Now, how do we structure them, to really tell a compelling story?
Well, the source material introduces this really handy framework called the peel method.
Peel. Okay, so like peeling back the layers of culture.
Kind of. It stands for point, explanation, example, and link.
Okay, break that down for me.
So your point, that's your core statement about a specific aspect of your culture. Like, for instance, family is central to my culture.
Okay, straightforward.
Then you move on to explanation. This is where you flesh out your point. So you might say, we prioritize multi-generational living with grandparents playing a vital role.
So you're giving the why behind the statement.
Exactly. Then comes the but this is where you bring in those personal stories, those specific details that make it real.
Okay, so for the family example.
You could say something like, every Sunday, my entire family gathers to cook and share a meal of fairs. We tell stories, we offer advice. It's a time for connection.
It's like you're transporting the listener right into that moment.
That's the goal. And finally, the link, this is where you tie it all back together.
So how does that Sunday faux gathering relate back to the bigger picture?
You might say, this weekly tradition strengthens our family bonds and reflects the importance our culture places on togetherness.
Okay, so we're linking that specific example back to that core cultural value.
You got it, the peel method. It's all about clarity and structure.
It's like a recipe for a great cultural story.
And speaking of recipes, the source also mentions, thinking about common cultural touch points like festivals, food etiquette, art.
These are things everyone can relate to.
Right. So think about how these manifest in your own culture, like Tet in Vietnam, a huge celebration full of traditions.
Or the Japanese tea ceremony, which is all about etiquette and mindfulness.
Exactly.
Okay, so we've got the structure now. How do we make it captivating?
Well, that's where vivid language comes in.
Paint us a picture.
So instead of saying something is important, you might say it's deeply rooted or integral.
Okay, so choosing words that are more evocative.
Yeah, and appeal to the senses. Like, instead of just saying we eat a special dish, you could say, during Eid, the aroma of saffron rice fills every home.
I can almost smell it.
And the source also talks about showing cultural awareness, maybe drawing comparisons with other cultures, respectfully, of course.
Like highlighting the differences, but in a way that's insightful, not judgmental.
Right. You might say, while some cultures value individualism, ours prioritizes community.
And of course, keeping it conversational, like you're talking to a friend.
Authenticity is key.
Okay, so now let's see it all come together. The source gives a sample answer breakdown. Can you walk us through it?
Sure. So this one's about hospitality. The point is, hospitality is sacred in my culture.
Okay, strong start.
Then the explanation, guests are treated with the utmost respect and care, almost like revered figures.
Makes sense.
Now, for a powerful example, my mother once hosted 20 strangers for dinner simply because they were passing through and looked tired.
Wow, that's amazing.
And finally, the link. This shows our deep-rooted belief in kindness, generosity, and making everyone feel welcome.
So you see the Peel method in action, bringing that abstract value to life.
Exactly.
Now, beyond just telling a good story, the source also gives some practical advice.
Right, like self-recording.
So you can hear a sound.
Yeah, analyze your fluency, your clarity. And there are some great external resources, too, like the IELTS app for pronunciation.
IELTS Liz for practice materials.
And the IELTS Reddit community for feedback.
It's like having a whole support system.
Now, zooming out a bit, why is all this important?
Yeah, beyond just personal identity or acing a test.
Well, understanding your own culture helps you understand others.
It's like having a framework for comparison.
Exactly. And the source suggests this can be valuable in so many ways, like comparing traditions in essays or discussing global issues.
You can even use these skills for other speaking prompts, like describe a significant festival.
And of course, broaden your horizons through documentaries, literature conversations.
The more we learn about others, the more we learn about ourselves.
Absolutely.
So to recap, the key takeaways for describing your culture go beyond the surface level.
Share specific stories, vivid details.
Use the Peel method for structure.
Employ vivid language.
And practice, practice, practice.
With self-recording and those helpful resources.
And here's a final thought for you to ponder.
Go ahead.
How does the way you describe your culture shape how others see you in your community?
That's a good one.
And if you had to choose just one story that truly captures your cultural values, what would it be?
Something to really think about.
All right, so you're really trying to get a grasp on cultural traditions and how they work in the world today, right?
Right.
Like how globalization changes things.
Yeah.
And you want to understand it all pretty quickly and in depth.
Oh, sure.
Well, that's what we're diving into today, and we've got some interesting stuff to work with for this.
Yeah.
Excerpts from IELTS Speaking, Culture, Traditions, and Globalization.
Interesting.
Now, you might think this is just about language exams, but stick with us.
Yeah.
It actually gives us some really good insights into the heart of culture in our globalized world.
You know, it's amazing how, even when we're talking about language skills, the importance of cultural understanding shines through.
Yeah.
It shows how deeply language and culture are connected, you know?
For sure.
So for this deep dive, our aim is to break down how traditions work at the center of a culture.
Okay.
How they're affected when the world becomes more interconnected because of globalization, and what ways we can keep them alive and vibrant. We'll use a really cool example to show all of this. The Mid-Autumn Festival.
Okay, the Mid-Autumn Festival. So you might know a little bit about this already.
Right.
It's a big celebration in Vietnam and other East Asian countries, and it really focuses on a core value, family unity, especially under the full moon, which has a lot of symbolism.
Exactly. And the way they express this value is so rich. Just imagine.
Yeah.
Families, multiple generations coming together,
Whoa.
children with their bright, colorful lanterns.
Okay.
And then you have mooncakes, those special round pastries, often filled with lotus seed paste.
That sounds amazing.
The round shape mirrors the full moon you see and strengthens that idea of being together.
Oh, I see.
It's beautiful.
That's so cool. And, you know, the source material makes this really come alive.
Right.
It gives this snapshot of a family at the grandparents' house.
Yeah.
So picture this, the warm light of paper lanterns,
I like it.
folk songs floating through the air,
Nice.
and the grandmother telling these ancient stories about Change the Moon Goddess.
Oh, wow.
And outside the streets are bustling with dragon dances, and you can hear the laughter of kids everywhere.
Such a lively scene.
It's amazing.
Yeah, and all of this sensory experience really makes this tradition special.
Oh, absolutely.
That's a key point. You know, focusing on how it feels, it shows how culturally important this festival is.
Okay.
Like the source says, it reflects how much they value family bonds in these cultures and how thankful they are for nature's gifts.
Right.
It's like a bridge between the past and the present, keeping their heritage alive, even as things modernize rapidly.
So thinking about these traditions as more than just yearly events,
Right.
how do they actually keep a culture's identity going over time? What's the actual way they preserve culture?
Well, think of traditions as living bridges.
Okay.
They connect one generation to the next, passing on not just practices, but also the basic values
Yeah.
and historical stories that make a culture unique.
Right.
Take the Mid-Autumn Festival. The storytelling is a perfect example. Through these stories, kids learn their history, their mythology, and feel like they belong. And naturally, they learn to respect their elders and the wisdom they have.
That's a really clear way to think about it.
Yeah.
Traditions as the living stories of a culture.
Exactly.
And the source makes an interesting point.
What's that?
These aren't like fixed, unchanging relics.
Right.
Traditions can adapt to stay relevant. The example of using eco-friendly lanterns is great.
Oh, yeah.
It shows how a tradition can change with the times without losing its core meaning.
Right. Its essential spirit.
Yeah,
Finding new ways to express it in today's world.
I like that.
Now, let's switch gears a bit.
Okay.
We need to think about the impact of something as big as globalization.
Globalization.
Yeah. How does this growing interconnectedness affect these deep-rooted cultural traditions?
That's a big one. And the source describes globalization really well.
How so?
Calls it a double-edged sword.
Interesting.
On the one hand, more exposure to different practices and ideas, well, it's understandable that it can overshadow local customs. A common example is how fast food is becoming more popular.
Yeah.
And it might push out traditional foods in some areas.
That makes sense. It's a real example of how global trends can come into everyday life.
Yeah.
And maybe lead to some traditional practices fading away.
It's like this blending.
Yeah. But on the other hand, globalization also gives cultures a great chance to connect and share their traditions with the world.
Oh, wow.
A great example is Japan's hanami.
Hanami.
Yeah, the tradition of viewing cherry blossoms. It's now celebrated in many parts of the world.
It's beautiful.
It is.
That really highlights the positive side of cultural exchange.
Definitely.
It's like these cultural practices are finding new audiences and getting a fresh start globally.
It's amazing.
So a key takeaway is that we need balance.
Balance.
Yeah, like welcoming new ideas and opportunities, but also actively protecting and promoting existing cultural traditions.
I agree.
And this brings up the question of what role governments play in this.
That's a crucial point about responsibility,
Yeah.
What can governments do to protect a nation's cultural heritage in this globalized world?
That's a tough question.
It is. But the source gives some good examples of different approaches.
Okay, what's your...
Well, one important way is funding.
Funding?
Yeah, dedicated funding for cultural preservation projects.
Like what specifically?
Well, it could involve restoring historical sites that are central to a culture's identity, or supporting efforts to document and revitalize endangered languages.
Right.
These languages often hold a treasure trove of cultural knowledge.
Yeah, language is so important.
It is.
And besides money, there are other ways to encourage things, right?
Absolutely.
And the example of South Korea giving tax breaks to people who wear hanbok.
Hanbok.
Yeah, their traditional clothing on holidays is really interesting.
It is.
It's a way to promote a visible cultural practice.
Yeah, it's about creating practical incentives for people to engage with their heritage. And another vital thing is including cultural education in school curriculums from a young age.
Starting early.
Exactly.
So teaching kids their folk music,
Yeah.
traditional crafts, and about important festivals.
Right.
This helps them feel proud of their culture and ensures this knowledge passes on to future generations.
It's so important.
It really is, and this isn't just a national issue, is it?
No, it's not.
The source also mentions the importance of global cooperation.
Like who?
Organizations like UNESCO and their World Heritage programs.
Right.
These programs protect traditions and places that are considered universally valuable.
Yeah, it's a team effort by the world to save cultural heritage that might be disappearing.
That's really inspiring.
It is.
So as we wrap up this deep dive,
Yeah.
what are the main takeaways you think our listeners should remember?
Well, first, the impact of sensory details is huge.
Yeah, man.
Remember we talked about that earlier?
Yeah.
It's about really grasping and remembering cultural experiences.
Like through our senses.
Right. The smell of mooncakes baking, the sound of kids laughing during a festival. These aren't just side details, they're part of the experience.
I agree.
They help us connect with the tradition on a much deeper level.
Absolutely. It's about experiencing it, not just knowing about it.
Exactly. The second takeaway is the importance of thinking comparatively.
What do you mean by that?
Well, recognizing that globalization is a double-edged sword, or that we need balance.
Okay.
This helps us analyze cultural issues in a more thoughtful and complex way.
Yeah, to see all sides.
And using specific examples like UNESCO's work or the Handbuch incentives, this gives us solid evidence and makes abstract ideas more real.
It connects theory and practice.
Right. And finally, the most important thing to remember,
What's that?
is the role of core cultural values.
Okay.
Things like emphasizing family unity or respecting nature.
Mm-hmm.
These values shape and sustain traditions.
They're at the heart of it all.
Exactly. They're the threads that connect all the practices and give them lasting meaning.
So to finish off, here's something to think about.
Okay.
Consider the traditions in your own community or even your own family.
Interesting.
How have you seen them change over time?
Yeah.
Have you noticed how global trends affect them?
Good question.
What core values do these traditions reflect?
It's worth considering.
And how might they keep changing in the years to come?
I like that.
It's a fascinating way to look at the world around us.
Definitely food for thought.
Absolutely.
Like it.
All right, thanks for joining us on this deep dive into cultural traditions and globalization.
It's been great.
Until next time.
See you later.
Bye.